courtroom was silent. Everyone stared at the man standing confidently before the judge, wearing a sharp navy blue suit. Moments earlier, 2 police officers had testified, accusing the man of a crime he didn't commit. But as the man slowly introduced himself, revealing his title, Chief Prosecutor of the state, shock rippled through the room. Gasps filled the air, and the officers' smug expressions crumbled into confusion and dread. "I am the Chief Prosecutor of this state," he said, his voice steady but laced with quiet anger. "And today, not only will I prove my innocence, but I will expose the corruption and prejudice that led to this unjust arrest." The 2 officers froze, their faces pale. Whispers spread among the crowd like wildfire. How could this have happened? They had clearly underestimated the man they targeted. But how had things escalated to this point? It all began a few days earlier on a rainy afternoon in downtown Atlanta. Marcus Hamilton, the state's chief prosecutor, had just finished an important meeting and decided to walk to a local cafe for coffee. Despite his high-profile job, Marcus liked blending in with regular people, staying grounded. He wore a simple black hoodie and jeans that day, thinking nothing of it. As he walked down the street, he noticed a commotion ahead. 2 police officers were confronting a young black teenager outside a convenience store. Marcus observed the situation, concerned. He recognized the tense, fearful look on the boy's face, one he'd seen countless times in the cases he handled. The officers were shouting at the boy, accusing him of shoplifting, though Marcus could see the boy's hands were empty. "Hey," Marcus called out calmly as he approached. "What's going on here?" One of the officers, a stocky man with a stern face, turned and glared at Marcus. "Step back. This doesn't concern you." Marcus held up his hands in a non-threatening manner. "I just want to make sure everything is handled fairly. That's all." The officers exchanged a glance. The taller one, Officer Reynolds, sneered. "You look suspicious yourself, buddy. What are you doing around here?" Marcus frowned. "Walking, getting coffee. Is that a crime?" "Don't get smart with us," the stocky officer, Officer Grant, snapped. "What's in your pockets?" Marcus was taken aback. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Empty your pockets. You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," Grant said, his hand moving to his holstered gun. The situation escalated quickly. Marcus, calm but firm, said, "I'm not emptying my pockets. I've done nothing wrong, and you have no probable cause." Reynolds stepped forward, towering over Marcus. "You resisting now? Is that what this is?" People on the street began to stop and stare. Some pulled out their phones to record. Marcus noticed, but remained composed. "I know my rights," he said evenly. "And you're violating them." But his words only seemed to inflame the officers. Without warning, they grabbed Marcus and slammed him against the patrol car. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice," Grant barked. The crowd gasped. Marcus felt his chest tighten with frustration and disbelief. How many times had he read about incidents like this? And now, here he was, in the middle of one. As they handcuffed him, Marcus looked at the young boy, who was now trembling and wide-eyed. "It's going to be okay," Marcus told him. "Stay strong." The officers ignored the murmurs of protest from the onlookers as they shoved Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car. His mind raced as he sat there, the rain tapping against the windows. He knew this wasn't about justice or law. It was about power, prejudice, and control. But what the officers didn't know was that they had just arrested the wrong man, the one man who had the resources, knowledge, and determination to fight back and hold them accountable. As the patrol car sped away, Marcus stared out the window, silently vowing to turn this injustice into an opportunity to shine a light on the systemic issues he had spent his career fighting against. The next morning, Marcus sat in a holding cell, calm despite the circumstances. He knew his team of lawyers would be working tirelessly to secure his release. But this wasn't just about getting out. It was about making a statement. When the officers arrived to escort him to court, their smug attitudes were evident. "Bet you're regretting your little stunt now," Reynolds taunted as he tightened the handcuffs. Marcus didn't respond. He simply followed them into the courtroom, his head held high. And that's where it all came to a head. Standing before the judge, Marcus revealed his identity, watching as the officer's confidence shattered in real time. The crowd in the courtroom leaned forward, eager to hear what would happen next. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice commanding. "What happened to me yesterday wasn't just an illegal arrest. It was a clear act of racial profiling, abuse of power, and a violation of my constitutional rights, and I will not let it go unanswered." The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The officers fidgeted nervously, realizing too late that they had made a grave mistake. The room was thick with tension as Marcus prepared to lay out his case, determined to expose the truth and hold the officers accountable. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Marcus stood tall, his steady gaze fixed on the judge. Every word that followed would dismantle the false narrative the officers had constructed and shine a glaring spotlight on their misconduct. The tension in the room grew heavier as Marcus adjusted his tie and spoke again. "Your Honor, yesterday, 2 officers of the law decided to judge me, not by my actions, but by the color of my eskai. They accused me of being a suspect without any evidence, violated my rights, and subjected me to public humiliation," Marcus said, his voice sharp with controlled anger. "I intend to hold them accountable for their actions, not just for me, but for every person they've treated the same way." The judge leaned forward, intrigued, while murmurs spread through the courtroom. The officer's lawyer attempted to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Let him continue," she said firmly. Marcus turned toward the courtroom gallery, making eye contact with the people who had gathered. Some were still in disbelief, others visibly upset. "I'm not just a black man in a hoodie," he continued. "I'm the chief prosecutor of this state, but yesterday that didn't matter, because to them, I was only what they saw on the surface." Officer Grant shifted uncomfortably, while Reynolds sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. The realization of their monumental mistake was written all over their faces. Grant whispered to their lawyer, but Marcus noticed the nervous glances they exchanged. Marcus pressed on, now addressing the judge. "The officers claimed I matched a suspect's description. Yet, I ask, Your Honor, where was the evidence? Was there a report, a witness statement? Or was I simply guilty of walking down the street while black?" The courtroom murmurs grew louder. The judge had to bang her gavel to bring the room back to order. Marcus waited, giving the moment the weight it deserved, before continuing. "Your Honor, I have witnesses and video evidence from the scene that prove my innocence and show the conduct of these officers. If it pleases the court, I'd like to submit it for review." At his words, a man in a suit entered the courtroom, holding a tablet. He approached the bench and handed it to the judge. "This footage was captured by several bystanders," Marcus explained. "It shows the officer's actions in full detail." The judge watched the video silently, her face unreadable. The room was silent, save for the faint sound of the video playing. The muffled audio revealed the officer's aggressive tone, the baseless accusations, and the moment they slammed Marcus against the patrol car. When the video ended, the judge sat back, her expression now stern. "This is troubling," she said, her tone icy. "Very troubling." The courtroom was electric with anticipation. Officer Reynolds, his face now flushed, whispered frantically to his lawyer, while Officer Grant stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. It was clear they hadn't expected Marcus to come prepared, or to be the man he was. But Marcus wasn't done. "Your Honor, these officers didn't just violate my rights," he said, his voice rising slightly. "They've set a dangerous precedent, one that erodes the public's trust in the justice system. If they could do this to me, the chief prosecutor of this state, imagine what happens to people without the resources or platform to fight back." The courtroom erupted into applause. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order, but a faint smile played on her lips. It was clear she sympathized with Marcus's argument. The officers, on the other hand, looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. But before the judge could speak, the officer's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my clients acted in good faith. They believed Mr. Hamilton was the suspect based on a credible report. Any misunderstanding was purely circumstantial." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A credible report?" he asked. "May I see this so-called report?" The lawyer faltered. It's not currently available." The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. Marcus folded his arms. "So, it doesn't exist?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Counselor, I suggest you advise your clients to be honest with this court." The lawyer sat down, flustered. Marcus seized the moment. "Your Honor, the truth is simple. These officers saw my skin color and decided it was enough to justify their actions. It wasn't a mistake. It was profiling, and I will not rest until justice is served." The judge nodded. "Mr. Hamilton, you've presented a compelling case. This court will take a recess to review the evidence and consider next steps." As the courtroom emptied, Marcus felt a wave of relief, but knew the battle wasn't over. The officers glared at him as they walked out, but Marcus stood his ground. He wasn't afraid. They had underestimated him once, but he wouldn't let it happen again. Later that day, Marcus returned to his office, where his team was waiting. "How did it go?" his assistant Rebecca asked. "They're shaken," Marcus replied. "But we're just getting started. I want every case these officers have been involved in reviewed. If they've abused their power before, we'll expose it." Rebecca nodded, already making notes. "Understood." That night, as Marcus sat in his living room, he couldn't help but think about the young boy he'd tried to help. He made a mental note to find the boy and ensure he was okay. This fight wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been targeted, silenced, or ignored. But as Marcus began to unwind, his phone buzzed. It was an anonymous tip, claiming the officers had destroyed evidence to cover up their actions. Marcus's heart raced. If this was true, it could blow the case wide open. He grabbed his coat and headed out, determined to follow the lead. Little did he know, what he was about to uncover would take the case to an entirely new level. The cold night air stung Marcus's face as he stepped out of his car and approached the dimly lit storage facility mentioned in the anonymous tip. His instincts told him he was walking into something big or dangerous. Either way, he had no choice but to see it through. He clutched a flashlight in one hand, the tip-off email printed and tucked in his coat pocket, and his phone in the other, ready to call for backup if things got out of hand. The facility was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of a flickering light bulb. He followed the instructions, counting the rows of storage units until he reached the one specified in the message. Unit 42B. The padlock on the door was already broken, hanging loosely as though someone had been in a hurry to leave. Marcus hesitated, his pulse quickening. Was this a setup? Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, boxes were piled high, some labeled with dates and case numbers, others unmarked. His flashlight illuminated the dust-covered contents. One box sat in the center, its lid slightly ajar as if begging to be opened. Marcus crouched down and lifted the lid. What he found made his blood run cold. Inside were stacks of shredded police reports, body camera footage on damaged USB drives, and even photographs of suspects with notes scribbled across them, racial slurs, derogatory comments, and, most damning of all, instructions to make it stick when charges seemed flimsy. These weren't just random documents. They were evidence of a pattern of misconduct by Officers Reynolds and Grant, and likely others in the department. Marcus carefully sifted through the box, finding a file labeled Operation Redline. Flipping through it, he saw it was a detailed plan to target minority neighborhoods under the guise of crime prevention, using aggressive tactics that disproportionately affected black residents. It was clear this wasn't just about him. This was systemic corruption, and it ran deep. As he was documenting the evidence with his phone, Marcus heard footsteps outside. He froze. Someone was here. Quickly, he switched off his flashlight and crouched behind a stack of boxes, heart pounding. The door creaked open, and a beam of light swept the room. "Did you find it?" a voice whispered. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was Officer Reynolds. "Grant said we couldn't leave anything behind." "Relax," another voice replied. "I'm checking now." Marcus held his breath as the officers moved deeper into the storage unit, their flashlights darting across the walls. He gripped his phone tightly, ready to record or call for help if needed. Reynolds cursed under his breath. "We should have burned it all. If Hamilton finds this, we're done." "You think I don't know that?" the second officer snapped. "Just hurry up." Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't let them destroy the evidence. But confronting them alone was risky. As he considered his options, his foot accidentally nudged a loose box. It toppled over with a loud crash. "Who's there?" Reynolds barked, his flashlight whipping toward the sound. Marcus knew he was out of time. He stood up slowly, raising his hands. "Just me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Chief Prosecutor Marcus Hamilton." The officers' faces twisted with panic and rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" Reynolds demanded, stepping closer. "Collecting evidence," Marcus replied. "Enough to bring both of you down." "You don't know what you're talking about," the second officer growled. "This is police property. You're trespassing." Marcus smirked. "Funny. I didn't know shredded reports and tampered evidence were standard issue." Reynolds clenched his fists. "You don't know who you're messing with, Hamilton." "No, Reynolds," Marcus shot back, stepping forward. "You don't know who you messed with. You thought I was just another black man you could intimidate and silence. But I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever." The tension in the room was suffocating. For a moment, it seemed like Reynolds might lash out. But before he could, loud sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Marcus had managed to send his location to his team moments before revealing himself. Backup was on the way. "You called them," Reynolds spat, his face contorting in anger. "Of course I did," Marcus said, his tone unwavering. "You're going to answer for everything you've done." The officers exchanged a frantic glance, then bolted for the door. But as they stepped outside, they were met with flashing lights and armed officers blocking their escape. "Don't move," a commanding voice ordered. Reynolds and his partner raised their hands reluctantly, their expressions a mix of fury and defeat. Marcus stepped out of the storage unit, watching as they were handcuffed and led away. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt a glimmer of hope. Justice was finally within reach. Back at his office, Marcus and his team spent hours combing through the evidence from the storage unit. Every piece told a story of corruption, bias, and abuse of power. It was overwhelming, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. The real battle would be exposing the truth to the public and ensuring accountability at every level. But as he sat at his desk, reviewing the Operation Redline file, a nagging thought crept into his mind. If Reynolds and Grant were involved, how many others in the department were complicit? And how far would they go to protect themselves? Before he could dwell on it further, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "This is Marcus Hamilton," a deep, gravelly voice responded. "You think you've won, Hamilton, but you've just made yourself a target." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, a chill running down his spine. The fight was far from over. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, gripping the phone tightly as the ominous words echoed in his mind. "You've just made yourself a target." He stared out the window of his office, the city lights flickering in the distance, and felt an unease settle in his chest. Whoever was behind he knew enough to find his number, which meant they could find other ways to intimidate him, or worse. But Marcus wasn't one to back down. Not now, not when he was so close to exposing the truth. The next morning, he woke up to find 2 uniformed officers waiting outside his home. For a moment, panic gripped him. Had the corruption spread so far that they'd come to silence him outright? But as he approached, the officers greeted him with professionalism. "Mr. Hamilton, we're here for your protection," one of them explained. "After last night's arrests, we've been assigned to ensure your safety. The department's concerned there might be retaliation." Marcus couldn't help but smirk at the irony. The same system that had allowed officers Reynolds and Grant to thrive was now offering him protection. Still, he appreciated the gesture. "Thank you," he said. "But I hope you're prepared for what's coming. This isn't going to be an easy fight." As he headed to work, his phone buzzed with notifications. News outlets were already picking up the story. Headlines like "Top Prosecutor Uncovers Police Corruption" and "Reynolds and Grant Face Multiple Charges" dominated the feeds. The public reaction was mixed. While many applauded Marcus for his bravery, others accused him of undermining law enforcement. By midday, Marcus found himself in a whirlwind of meetings. His team was working tirelessly to prepare the case, but the sheer volume of evidence was staggering. Each document, each video clip, painted a damning picture of systemic abuse. It wasn't just about Reynolds and Grant anymore. It was about an entire culture that had allowed such behavior to flourish. But amidst the chaos, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he glanced out his office window or stepped into a crowded room, he felt a pair of eyes lingering on him a little too long. He chalked it up to paranoia at first, but the unease only grew stronger. Later that evening, as he drove home, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Drop the case, or you'll regret it." Marcus pulled over to the side of the road, his heart pounding. The threat was clear, but it only fueled his determination. He took a deep breath and replied, "I don't scare easily." When he arrived home, he found his front door slightly ajar. Alarm bells went off in his head. He parked his car and approached cautiously, dialing the police on his phone. "This is Marcus Hamilton. I think someone's broken into my home," he told the dispatcher, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The officers arrived quickly, clearing the house and confirming that no one was inside. But the intruder had left a message. On Marcus's dining table was a single piece of paper with the words, "You were warned," scrawled in bold black letters. The officers took the note as evidence, but the intrusion only deepened Marcus's resolve. "They're trying to scare me," he told his team the next day. "But all they've done is prove how desperate they are. We're on the right track, and they know it." The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, press briefings, and late-night work sessions. Marcus's team unearthed more evidence linking Reynolds and Grant to other corrupt officers, and the public outcry was growing louder. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding accountability and justice for the communities that had suffered under the department's abuse. But as the case gained momentum, so did the threats. Marcus received another call late one night. This time the voice on the other end was calm and calculated. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Hamilton," the caller said. "We have friends in high places. Walk away while you still can." Marcus didn't flinch. "You don't scare me," he replied. "Oh, and if you have friends in high places, tell them to lawyer up. They're next." The line went dead, but Marcus knew the battle was far from over. The deeper he dug, the more enemies he made. And while he was prepared for the fight, he couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on him and those around him. The turning point came one stormy night when Marcus's car was forced off the road by an unmarked vehicle. He managed to regain control and pull over, but the message was clear. His enemies weren't just sending threats anymore. They were taking action. As he sat in his car, rain pounding against the windshield, Marcus felt a mix of fear and anger bubbling inside him. He was no stranger to challenges, but this was personal. They weren't just attacking him. They were attacking everything he stood for. That night, Marcus made a decision. He called a press conference for the following morning, vowing to bring every piece of evidence he had to the public eye. "If they think they can silence me, they're wrong," he told his team. "We're not just fighting for justice, we're fighting for change." The next day, as Marcus stood before the cameras, he felt a surge of determination. The world was watching, and he was ready to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing incessantly as Marcus Hamilton stepped onto the podium. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with unshakable resolve. This was the moment he had been preparing for, where every threat, every attempt to silence him would only add fuel to his mission. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady but powerful. "What I'm about to share isn't just a story about two officers. It's a story about a system that has failed its citizens and a culture that protects corruption at all costs. Today, we're putting an NDDI. Oh, that." The room went silent as Marcus revealed everything: videos, documents, testimonies from victims too afraid to speak out before. Screens behind him displayed damning evidence, showing Reynolds and Grant abusing their power repeatedly. He also exposed how higher-ups in the department had covered for them for years, burying complaints and threatening whistleblowers. The air grew thick with tension as Marcus dropped a bombshell. "And it doesn't stop there," he said, pausing for effect. "We've uncovered links to a network of officers who've been working together to manipulate evidence, intimidate witnesses, and profit from illegal activities. This isn't a few bad apples. This is an orchard rotting from the inside out." The reporters erupted with questions, but Marcus held up his hand. "I'll take questions later. For now, let me be clear. Justice isn't just coming for Reynolds and Grant. It's coming for anyone who played a role in this corruption." As the press conference ended, Marcus's phone buzzed nonstop. His revelations had ignited a firestorm. Social media was flooded with outrage, and more victims began coming forward, emboldened by Marcus's courage. But the backlash was just as intense. Protesters surrounded the courthouse, demanding reform, while others accused Marcus of trying to tear apart the police force. The threats against him escalated. That night, his team discovered a tracking device planted on his car, a chilling reminder that his enemies were watching his every move. Despite the dangers, Marcus pressed on. He knew the stakes were too high to back down now. The trial of Officers Reynolds and Grant began, and the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see justice served. During the trial, Marcus delivered a masterful prosecution, presenting evidence so undeniable that even the defense struggled to respond. The jury was shown body cam footage of Reynolds and Grant harassing innocent citizens, fabricating charges, and abusing their authority. One clip in particular left the courtroom stunned. It showed the officers planting drugs on a young black man after beating him and laughing about it afterward. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Reynolds and Grant weren't just guilty. They were symbols of a much larger problem. Marcus's case became a rallying cry for reform, sparking debates across the nation about accountability in law enforcement. But just when it seemed like the tide was turning, another shocking twist rocked the case. During a cross-examination, one of Marcus's witnesses, a fellow officer, broke down under pressure and confessed to being part of the corrupt network. He revealed that his superiors had ordered him to frame innocent people, and he named names, powerful names. The courtroom erupted in chaos as the witness's confession sent shockwaves through the case. Marcus seized the moment, pushing for the names to be investigated immediately. But the revelation also made him a bigger target. If his enemies were desperate before, now they were cornered and dangerous. One evening, as Marcus was heading home from the courthouse, he noticed a black SUV following him. His heart raced as he took a series of turns, trying to lose the vehicle. But no matter where he went, the SUV stayed on his tail. Finally, he pulled into a gas station, hoping to confront whoever was behind him. But as he stepped out of his car, the SUV sped off, leaving him shaken but unharmed. The next day, Marcus increased his security, knowing that his fight wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. It was about survival. He doubled down on his efforts, working late into the night to prepare for the trial's final arguments. When the jury finally delivered its verdict, the courtroom was silent. "We find the defendants guilty on all charges," the foreperson announced. The room erupted in cheers and applause, but Marcus remained composed. This was a victory, but it was only the beginning. As Reynolds and Grant were led away in handcuffs, Marcus turned to address the press gathered outside the courthouse. "This isn't just about two officers," he said. "It's about creating a system where justice is truly blind and accountability is more than a buzzword. We have a long way to go, but today, we've taken a step in the right direction." The victory was bittersweet. Marcus knew that the battle for justice was far from over. But as he walked out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by supporters chanting his name, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just his fight. It was a fight for everyone who believed in a better, fairer future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more captivating stories like this one. Your support helps keep these important channel alive.